Hello, everyone. Thanks again for being here. I know most of you, if you've seen the other counseling center workshops, know Elizabeth Saunders. She always puts them on for us. But Elizabeth, I'll let you introduce yourself for those who are just now meeting you.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you. Hello, my name is Elizabeth Saunders. As she mentioned, I am one of the therapists over here at the Campus Counseling Center. My degree is licensed clinical social worker, or LCSW, which is one of the degrees needed to become a professional therapist. So yeah, I have a slide with all of our contact information at the end of this. And I encourage all of you, if you haven't stopped by our office, we're on the first floor of Center for Integrated Health and Human Inquiry building, and offer lots of things, not just maybe the traditional therapy you would think of, but all of our therapists have different skill sets, and we are here for all sorts of different questions and things that you have going on. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and pull up a little PowerPoint for today's topic. Let me see. Share. And Ryan, are you still there? Can everyone see okay? Oh, I wrote toxic positivity here. Put a little note for myself towards the slide. Can you see this okay?
Yeah, it looks great.
All right, sounds good. So what we're going to talk about today is lots of different skills related to growing emotional intelligence and developing social cognition. I put my little note on there because I wanted to remember to talk about it, but I'll probably circle back to that later on as we move through some of these things. So the objectives today are to sort of differentiate some of these terms. We don't need to get super connected to them. But it just helps us parcel out into smaller pieces the different skills that you might be able to take away today or to share with others. So some words that I will use today are social emotional learning, having emotional intelligence, and the concept of social cognition. I'll spend a chunk of time in the middle about ways we can develop skills in these areas and hopefully make it applicable for how we see these things show up in the college and post-college experience of being humans. Okay, so social emotional learning is the process that helps students or people develop skills to understand and manage emotions. These are really imperative to interpersonal relationships, the inevitable conflict that comes up in relationships with other people, and how we can roll with the punches of life in a way that wreaks the least amount of havoc on our internal experience. So for all of this, I heard a good metaphor on one of my podcasts the other day. A woman was describing her experience of when she's in conversation with another person and that other person is having a really strong emotional experience. She said she'll envision any external emotions or energy or conflict that we run into as just sort of a giant river. So this river of external experience, of other people's emotional experience, is flowing by us all the time, anytime we leave our house and we're amongst other people. What she said she likes to envision when she feels that river of emotion might start to sweep her up is she envisions either rooting her feet on the bank on a really solid piece of sand, or envision sort of grabbing onto a really strong sapling or tree branch so that she can stand there on the side of the river, but doesn't get swept up in someone else's experience. And so these bullet points on this slide, these 5 bullet points, are all of the skills we need to be able to find that rooting and grab onto that tree branch when we are out in the world amongst this river of feelings. So again, the emotional intelligence is the capability of us as people to recognize what's going on inside of me, which then allows me to recognize what's going on in others, which then allows me to determine what's mine and what's theirs, and then help manage that interaction with those people or that environment. Okay, so I've broken these 5 steps down in the next slides, but they are everything starts with self-awareness. So they start with, how do I learn myself best? Then once I know what that self is, how do I manage it? Then how do I work on the motivation to engage in all of these activities? Then how do I take that out into the world and be able to keep all of that stuff of mine while still having empathy with others and growing my interactional skills with others? And also, I guess I have this on full screen. If anyone has a question, feel free to just unmute and shout out and interrupt me, because I think that's the only way I'll see it. Or you could type something into the chat and I'll make sure to look at it at the end before we finish up. So of course, the benefits of developing those 5 skills I just mentioned is that the more efficient we become at understanding ourselves and managing our own emotional responses, we may find that stress in our life decreases, that others comment that they appreciate communicating with us, that we get to experience hearing other people's stories in the world without getting sucked downriver. And we can become adept at either in our own lives or helping others sort of diffuse conflict and move into the next stage. But if you'll notice on this slide, where I said managing our emotions in positive ways, it reminded me of the toxic positivity sort of comments I put at the beginning of this. So I think in the midst of this whole conversation today, I also want to help us not feel like we have to be perfect and fix all the world's problems and everyone has to be happy and cheerful all the time. I know that's kind of a funny nuance to add, but I think, what I've noticed in the field of mental health is that the pendulum kind of swings from one side to the other. So maybe, 20 or 30 years ago, many of us weren't talking about a lot of these things openly and honestly. I do feel like the dialogue around positive communication and emotional health and mental wellness has really swung the other way, which is fantastic. But with that, I always want to be cautious that we're not developing a culture that we all then can never be angry sometimes, or can never feel overwhelmed by the world's problems. I think it's really trying to find that balance. Okay. So skill building step number 1 of growing emotional awareness is getting to know yourself. So, right, like that old standby phrase of know thyself. In order to change behavior, we have to bring awareness to our automatic thoughts and behaviors. Brene Brown, who is a researcher in my field of social work, borrows a quote from, and now because I didn't write it down, I'm going to forget, but borrows a quote from a gentleman who was an early psychotherapist and philosopher. And what both of their quotes are generally about is that between a stimulus and a response is a space. In our automatic thoughts and behavior, that space might be very small and imperceptible. Our job in growing self-awareness is to make that space feel bigger and roomier, so that between stimulus and response, we can think through which response we'd like to make. So we have to start by observing ourselves. And if even in all of this that I'm saying, you find yourself being like, what is she talking about? I think a good way to summarize this is through the phrase, maybe waking up with intention and saying, today I'll try to notice behaviors that may be holding me back. just sort of moving out of your body, watching yourself from that overhead observer and saying like, oh, that's so interesting that I automatically drive to campus this way instead of this way. I wonder why I do that. Oh, it started because I like to get coffee at this coffee place on the way, or it started because this is how my dad always drove us to this part of town. And then behind that become all the stories that inform the actions that we take every day. And it can be a really beautiful exploration for why we think and act the way that we do. Other ideas for how to grow this observer voice in our mind is starting a new routine. So when we talked last time, I emphasized this as well, just how we make new neural connections can be through taking a different driving route to the grocery store, going to a different part of town once a month, just because. So to grow self-awareness, if we try to integrate a new routine and observe how well we do in that process, it could really teach us a lot about ourselves. Like, man, so here's something about me. I guess I enjoy cooking. I respond very differently if I'm looking at a recipe that I've found online that I have to click through a bunch of spam and read a whole blog article about, versus if I'm cooking a new recipe from a book I got from the library, versus if I'm cooking a new dish that I've written out on a note card from a friend or relative. And so by using a new recipe, I learn about myself, like, wow, I get really frustrated with click boxes and technology. That's just something interesting to know about myself. Or, wow, when I take the time to make a family recipe off a note card, I noticed that I connect with my family more verbally. And I think that's really special. So I think that's an example of how we can grow that self-awareness through a new routine. I also think journaling can just teach us loads about ourselves. It works because it does bring to our conscious mind the awareness around how we live our days. Anyone who comes to counseling with me will know, though, that the word journaling to me is really open-ended. Sometimes journaling to me can involve lists, it can involve pictures, it might not involve complete sentences. So I use that term very broadly as well to be very personal to what works for people. Another important concept of self-awareness and in all of these things is, hopefully I said this in my example about cooking, is that we learn to grow our vocabulary of feelings words. So to the left, maybe some of you have seen the wheel of emotion, and then to the right is just a list of all the words that we use as part of our human experience. And I am noticing too, that's interesting on this list, that these tend to be the heavier emotions, which actually makes me glad too, because again, I think feelings can accidentally fall in a category of like the good feelings or the bad feelings. And I think when we're looking at a list of feeling words or this feeling wheel, moving away from judgments about what the different feelings are and more specifically how we would describe them. And so if you notice, the middle of the wheel are the more general terms we use to talk about emotion, but the more specific we get as you move out of the wheel, the more clear we can be about what our needs might actually be, and then therefore how to move through it or figure out next steps. And I think I meant to put this slide up by journaling, but this is one more about, still we're on step number 1 of emotional intelligence and growing our self-awareness. For those of you who use Instagram or social media, Dr. Nicole LaPera has written a book called How to Do the Work, and she has a robust Instagram, and she talks a lot about the benefits of daily journaling or spending a few minutes on growing the self-awareness piece every day or every week. So step number 1 is sort of what I mentioned at the beginning, waking up with a focus of like, I'm going to observe myself today and see if there's something that I'm doing that's causing more stress than relief in my life right now. So an example of that might be, I'm noticing that every time my family calls or reaches out about how school is going, I'm very defensive about it because I'm worried that they're going to judge me. So I might turn that sentence into, I'd like to be less defensive with my loved ones. Step number 2 of that might be to write affirmations that are going to help me achieve this. So one of these might be, I can stay calm, I can stay in control of my body's response. And then how these are actually going to happen in the day when they do come up is that I will practice identifying my feelings and writing them in this journal. So yeah, just a breakdown of different ideas for growing self-awareness. I also was reading a really cool article this week about forest bathing. I don't know, I'm one of those people that in my, let me back up. I think of wellness as physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual wellness. And under my broad category of spiritual wellness, I do think that in growing our self-awareness, times when we can get quiet and connect to a bigger system, be it religious or non-religious, but to get quiet and get alone can be really helpful in this space too. So maybe it's walking around in nature for a few minutes. Oh man, I really focus much of this on the growing self-awareness. I think it is the most important first step. Okay, so this also relates to my example of how we can do this through starting a new routine, is exploring questions around various milestones. So this time of year might be a great time to really observe. There are lots of Western holidays that come up around this time of year. The transition in the semester or with the ending of this semester and starting fresh in January. Practice exploring questions like, wow, how did I recover from this really intense first semester? And again, this is another slide where it's important to check toxic positivity as well. But maybe when the pendulum is all the way far to the left and we find ourselves saying like, this is horrible, this is the worst, I can't believe I did this. And instead of swinging all the way to the other side and saying like, I just need to get over it, or I don't have time to wallow, it's trying to find both. It's saying like, wow, this was a really challenging semester. Let me observe how I made it through to the other side, how I succeeded, and what steps I can take to maybe change it next time. And again, this last little bullet is just circling back to sitting in that space between stimulus and response. So an experience happens to me. Did I try to move really quick through the emotion, or did I allow myself to sit in it? Did I allow myself to be angry or anxious? And then did that allow my body to kind of attach a specific emotion to it, move through it, and figure out what choices to make next? Okay, so step number 2 of emotional awareness skill building is, now I know all these things. I know how to, that I'm allowed to feel angry. I'm allowed to pick a specific emotion to go with it. I know how different routines and things from my environment make me feel. That's all fine and good. The next step is then, how do I learn to corral those and manage them? And what does bouncing back look like for me? So when we talk about learning emotional awareness, we talk about 2 different mindsets. Many of us as humans, from a level of protection or maybe from family or from culture, tend toward a fixed mindset. So this is very much like, if I do these steps, I should get this grade. It's very sort of outcome dependent and doesn't leave a lot of room for looking at different trails to get to the same destination. A growth mindset can tend to be very helpful in self-management because it allows our nervous system to quiet. It allows our problem-solving part of our brain to kick in and say, oh, there might be actually 4 different ways to get to the same outcome. What can I do differently? And, or maybe there are 4 different ways to get to 4 different outcomes. And so really keeping in mind, as you would, the very cliche picture of a tree and its branches, figuring out the different branches we can take on this journey. So again, the ways to develop these branches in our brain are trying a new activity or skill. I would say like signing up for clubs and things around campus, getting to know professors. To go back to my previous example of, man, I'm afraid to tell I'm finding myself getting defensive when my family asks about grades. Some of this might be, but I always have to answer my phone when my mom calls. Using a growth mindset, we might say, I'm actually going to learn how to self-manage my stress when I don't answer the phone when my mom calls, and realize that I don't have to pick up the phone and share with my family every time how I'm doing about school. So, which would be a new activity or skill in boundary setting. And we develop those skills by brainstorming and using lots of the resources around us here on campus and academically. So this is also, oh yeah, this chess champion quote. Anyway, well, I won't get into that. I'm gonna run out of time. But anyway, the moment we believe that success is determined by an ingrained level of ability, we will be brittle in the face of adversity. So rather than like only certain people with these certain skills can get to this certain place, tends to bring up resentment in us versus like, oh, maybe people with all different sorts of abilities can take different paths to get to the same place. Okay, so skill number 3 is growing more awareness about how we're motivated as people. And so motivation can come from the inside. These are things that might match up with our personal goals, our family values, or our religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs. So these are the things that really strongly connect to our values. Extrinsic goals are things that happen on the outside and are less in our control. And these are the things like making sure we get certain grades, getting a certain promotion or raise. It's important to know what our drivers are and balancing what our drivers are with the situation. If I know about myself that extrinsic goals, so positive reinforcement from the outside, is a big driver for me, but I'm in a work environment that doesn't focus heavily on external validation and assurance and praise, I might need to think about getting a different job if it really starts to erode my motivation to participate in that environment. And again, if we don't have the first 2 steps of this process, if our emotional abilities aren't in hand, if we haven't developed that self-awareness, and then if we haven't done step 2, which is figuring out how we're going to manage those emotions and try different things, and then moving into these next steps, if we can't have empathy for other people's experiences, then no matter how book smart we are, we're going to run into a lot of trouble in these areas. Okay, so as mentioned in that quote, part of emotional awareness is empathy building. And Paula and I, who's sitting in my office, had even just this morning a very interesting conversation related to awareness or to empathy. So empathy is the, after we've developed all these skills in ourselves, is having the awareness that that experience is happening in other people. There are a lot of benefits to that. They create stronger and meaningful relationships. They're going to lead us to successes in work and school, because the faster we're able to get to that understanding of what someone else's internal experience is, the better we'll figure out how not to run into all the barriers that we might hit otherwise in group projects and work projects. And again, this is all toward the goal of just decreasing our stress and creating a better quality of life. However, the other side of that too is learning that empathy is allowed to have boundaries too. And so as people, I can't be overly aware of someone else's emotional experience, because, to go back to my metaphor from the beginning, then we're just hopping in the river. And that doesn't do us any good to also get swept up in the stream of emotion with someone else. We need someone else to be able to stay on shore. And if that someone else is us, then the more the better. So the empathy, of course, is like being able to read this in other people, but it's also knowing when to say, whoa, I am starting to absorb a lot of this person's energy, and I can't be helpful to them if my brain and body are also getting swept up in their emotions in this. And I think also a crucial part of this is knowing that another person's cultural experience, economic experience, may mean that we're both in a similar situation and not experiencing the conflict or beauty in the same way. And these are just pretty basic people skills. But again, I think a lot of us, I don't know if we're getting too far away to keep talking about COVID times, but I think there's a lot culturally. And if anyone is in the anthropology major, I don't even know if that's a major here, but I think there's a lot that contributes to maybe as humans, us not getting as much natural exposure to these things in life. You know, we hear a lot of conversation about how the introduction of social media and the internet and relating to people through screens is impacting how we relate to humans then in person. So all the time we hear about people online being able to say things that that if you were to find yourself in a person-to-person interaction like that, it would seem very harsh and out of place and not socially acceptable. And so I do think some of these basics are really important to remember in person, because we don't get as much social practice with them. And that is remembering to both observe in others' facial expression and recognize how we are relating, to have that practice in making direct eye contact or noticing when I don't enjoy making that eye contact. And then how we're using hands and arms and posture and all of those things. If it is something that feels really uncomfortable, because maybe you do really relate to how as a culture we've moved away from that, but you know it's something that might be required of you in a class or in a future career, I think there is some good practice that can come by hanging out in the bathroom in front of the mirror and just seeing how when you're listening to something, your face is. That was a big wake-up call for me during the pandemic. I did a lot of therapy online and over computers, but I could also see my face for the first time as a therapist. And it was really, really helpful to see that sometimes when I listen, what my face does, and to know like, oh, someone might be interpreting this in a much different way than how I think I'm coming off without looking at my face as I do therapy. And of course, if you trust friends and family to give you sincere feedback about how you present physically, I think that can be useful too. Okay, and finally, so we've taken all of these steps of knowing ourselves, then managing ourselves, then figuring out what our motivations are in interactions, taking those and having empathy to the others we relate, and then taking it to a greater social experience. And trying to find a way to create desirable experiences amongst other humans. So those skills are practicing our words and how our words come out and how words have meaning. They're noticing how we navigate conflict. Doing all of these things grows confidence and empower us to take on leadership roles and change maker roles, and maybe have lifelong professional, personal relationships and bonds, and creating really beautiful community projects. Okay, so finally, a break from me speaking. This video that I found is geared toward education around teaching. I just want to come back really quick. I wanted to make sure this slide didn't get moved. We're going to move into then how we take all of these skills and navigate social contexts, which is using the language of social cognition. So let me move to this video. Okay, we're sharing here, and I'm gonna play this. So no, it's geared toward teaching around children, but I think many of these skills are things that apply to us as adults as well.
I'm Dr. Craig Pullman, here to talk about social cognition, which is the set of mental abilities that guide interactions with others. Put differently, it's thinking about relating. Social cognition has two important aspects. The first is interpreting social information, much of which is verbal, like picking up social lingo and nuance. It can be really hard for some kids to keep up with the rapid pace of social language. A lot of social communication is subtle, such as how we use voice inflection. For example, the sentence, "I lost my hat," could mean several things depending on which word gets emphasized. I lost my hat. I lost my hat. I lost my hat. I lost my hat. Students with social cognition problems are often confused by these nuances of communication. They might be very literal in their interpretation and not appreciate other possible meanings of words, phrases, and sentences. Social information can be nonverbal, such as reading facial expressions and body language, as well as recognizing emotions in others. Social information can be complex. For example, smoothly entering into a group situation, like some kids playing a game, requires first interpreting both verbal and nonverbal signals of multiple people. These signals illuminate how open the group is to a new member or player, for example, or they indicate when would be a good moment to jump in. The second aspect of social cognition is taking action, or using the available information to make decisions about how to best navigate situations and relationships. This could be figuring out what to say, when to say it, and how to say it, as well as what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. Social decisions cover a lot of territory and are important throughout the school day. They include figuring out how best to start and maintain a conversation, gauge what to say or do for the audience, like a teacher, enter into a group situation, like a game, resolve conflicts, make friends and develop relationships, and match emotions to those of another person or of a group, such as not being goofy if the mood is serious. Social decisions encompass verbalizations, body language, and actions. People with social cognition problems often have little self-awareness. They have trouble seeing themselves as others see them. Social cognition obviously has some overlap with language in terms of interpreting communication and expressing thoughts and needs. Some instructional approaches place hidden demands on social cognition. Examples include group work and team projects, cooperative structures like think, pair, share, and whole class discussions. Also, attention interfaces with social cognition. For example, relating with others often requires self-regulation to avoid impulsive decisions. Social cognition is a mental ability that is critical for school success, even though it does not have the same kinds of obvious connections as other neurodevelopmental constructs. And success in adulthood, professionally and personally, is intertwined with social cognition. I'll see you next time.
I do just want to share too, sometimes I share resources and I hear it in one way at a different time than I might. So even just now, as I was listening, I think in our social language these days, there's a lot of conversation around neurodivergence and thinking in a neurotypical way. So if you had questions or concerns come up while listening to that video, know that I was thinking about it with that lens as well, and hearing some of those things about making sure there isn't always a right or wrong with social cognition and how we relate to groups, but this is a different one, of how we relate to groups, but that it may mean that we still have to do those skills of developing, like, oh, this is something I noticed about when I'm assigned group work, and it is challenging for me to know when to join the group or not join the group. I know that I need to make career choices based off of this, or I know I need to verbalize this to my boss. So I just wanted to kind of focus on that part of the video. I did move some slides around, so we'll circle back to the concepts of that one. Let me move to this next slide. So social cognition is the process of remembering and using information in social contexts. There's the step of knowing your own behavior and then being able to anticipate others. So after that film, again, it's the skills of nonverbal and physical communication taken with the verbal, which is what to say, when to say it, and how to say it. And then, of course, just sort of the different skills needed for that, all taking into account that we don't always need to make these changes about ourselves. It might mean we just need to know ourselves well enough to know what environments we could be successful in, and or how to ask people in positions of power for what we need to be successful. There is one other concept I want to talk about, and I love this story. I was going to play it, but it might take more time, so I'll just relay the story. So there is an organizational psychologist, his name is Adam Grant, and he uses this example from history about two dignitaries, and they were to meet with the wife of another person of importance in the country. The one person, they each met with the wife, and afterwards her thoughts were, person number one was very interesting and knowledgeable, but person number two made me feel very interesting and knowledgeable. So the concept at play there is called inverse charisma. This is the idea that when we interact with others, we draw the best out in them. And by making them feel valued and important and interesting, it can create a feeling of safety and respect back to us. So this skill of inverse charisma, I should have included asking questions here as well, but this can be achieved through asking questions, mirroring other people, labeling the concepts that we're talking about, and reflecting back that we've heard what someone has said. And again, this quote that I'm sure we all know, which is, people might not always remember what you say, but they will remember how you made them feel. Okay, so boy, this was a lot of talking today. I'm realizing that if I do this one again, I need to include more that's not just me feeling lectury, but I hope something from this felt useful or interesting, or was something you could connect to. Again, the basics to take away are that we can all continue to learn and grow our emotional literacy skills. It all starts with knowing ourselves as best we can, and not jumping in the river with everyone else's emotional experience, and practicing all of this awareness in social situations. It's an ongoing practice in life. And as usual, I'm always excited and happy to talk about these concepts anytime in the Counseling Center office. And I think that is it for me at the moment. Let me do a stop share. Did anyone have any questions or concerns that came up while I was speaking? All right. Ryan, anything else that you have questions about or wish we would have talked about or covered?
No questions, but there is one thing that I really enjoyed, and it was noticing your behavior that you wanted to change and then doing the affirmations and practicing that whenever that came up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. As usual, I'm happy to share any of this if anyone would like to read more about it or learn more about it.
I would like more on the how it was back a couple of slides ago, like engaging with that person, but more on what you said, maybe those questions that we could help foster that conversation in a way to make that person feel like they're the interesting aspect of it.
Oh, okay. I know. Maybe I should have just pulled it up. We have a few more minutes. I don't know. What do you think, Ryan? Should I play my little like radio show clip of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you guys have other commitments like class or something, feel free to drop off, but I think it'd definitely be interesting to see it.
Let me just play this little clip because they talk about it on this podcast that I found. So let me just paste it. I don't think you're like, oh, I shouldn't have asked that question. She's keeping us for 10 more
No,
minutes.
no. You guys are-
I want to, but I should be able to pull it up quickly. And I do think it's an interesting listen, and I did write my times down. So here we go. Let's see. Make sure the sound works.
Welcome, everybody. The Thursday.
Oops.
St.
Okay.
Benjamin.
Here we go. This is the story.
Benjamin and William. Wow, so intuitive you are. It's very intuitive. Okay, so in the UK in the year 1874, there was an election happening for the prime minister, and there were two men running against each other. One was named Benjamin Disraeli, and the other William Gladstone. So the two of them were competing head to head to win the spot for the prime minister of England. So here is the story. There was apparently two dinners that happened over the course of this election. Most of us are familiar with Winston Churchill, who was also a well-known leader during the, I believe, World War II era of England. Pretty sure.
Check that.
But anyways, Winston Churchill's mother dined with each of the candidates at some different points during the election. She had one meal with William Gladstone and another meal with Benjamin Disraeli. So she was asked about those two dinners by an English journalist, and here's what she said. So she said, when I left the dining room, after sitting next to Gladstone, I thought he was the cleverest man in England. But when I sat next to Disraeli, I left feeling that I was the cleverest woman.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So Disraeli made her feel smart.
Disraeli made her feel smart. And then this is a quote from, I believe, that journalist. Disraeli had spent the whole evening asking her questions and listening intently to her responses. He wanted to know everything about her, and he tried to steer the conversation toward her. Naturally, she talked, and we always feel good talking about ourselves. Not surprisingly, Disraeli, the person who mastered the art of making other people feel important, won the election. Boom. And it goes on to say, it wasn't that Disraeli wasn't as brilliant as Gladstone. He was. However, Disraeli had mastered the art of making other people feel brilliant, respected, and important. Key secret of charismatic leaders. All right. So essentially, Gladstone may have been more qualified. He was a brilliant candidate, but Disraeli had this ability to make other people feel loved, to make other people feel important, and to bring out the best in other people. Now, this is an incredibly important and valuable trait in leadership, excuse me, but when it comes to persuasive communication, nothing is more important, I believe, than making the other person feel heard and valued. And I'm sure you get this too as the counselor, obviously. But I think this is a major mistake tons of people make. And especially if you're in sales, you might just be a talker and you just spew that canned presentation left and right, hoping that somebody.
Okay. Oh, did this sound, Carrie? I realized I wasn't sharing my screen anymore.
Yeah, the sound was great.
Oh, good. Okay. So it keeps going. I missed whoever's name it was. Where did my Zoom go? I missed whoever's name it was that asked that question.
Oh, that was Sharice.
Oh, yeah. Are you still here?
Yeah, she is.
Oh, yeah. Sharice,
Here.
helpful or interesting, and or would you like to just copy that link and maybe listen to more of that podcast, or was there something more specific about that you wanted me to add to?
No, I kind of I think in your slides you might have had like little like bullet points on how to have those conversations, or maybe what questions to ask if
Sure.
I don't know, sometimes you might not be as outgoing as you think you would be in those moments.
Sure. I will absolutely break that down, and or when I email it to Ryan, include what slide number it is and add additional resources and bullet points. Happy to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions, thoughts, concerns? All right, cool.
Thank you guys for showing up. A little housekeeping. Today was the last COSI workshop. So at the end of the day, I'll send you all of the slides for all of the semester, as well as all of the workshop recordings. Have a great rest of your day.
All right.